Hit the lights!
You've discovered the Halfwatt podcast. We want to educate and entertain by tapping into the most trusted source of new technology, the ones installing and innovating it. You, the tradespeople that build from the ground up. Join us as we talk with industry leaders, veteran contractors, and even some young blood.
Really appreciate the advice you gave me yesterday on the amps.
No problem. I'm glad you asked, actually, because that's my world right there. I love that stuff. That's my hobby.
Right. I haven't been able to snowboard in years, so I'm just like, why don't I just get back into playing music?
Yeah, music for me is such an outlet, and we're semi-pro, right? Because we get paid, we get to play out, but we all have professional jobs. We're all dads. We're all married.
Right.
We have our hands full, so we're lucky our wives even let us do it, but we get to be rock stars every now and then. It's so fun.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Halfwatt podcast. I'm Gage, and joining us today is Michael Brown, the ops manager of the enterprise side of our office.
Install manager, yep.
Oh, install manager.
Yeah. We're actually looking for an ops manager right now. In fact, we just made an offer to somebody. That should all work out, hopefully, and they'll probably come in as a senior project manager and then work their way into an ops manager role. Right on.
So we'll clip the first 3 minutes of this and put it up on the LinkedIn, help them out a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. No, I hope that works out.
I do too.
So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Really excited to have you. You have an incredible amount of experience. I think, like you said, you've worked on access. Spring chicken, but I think you said you've worked on systems in over 25, maybe even over 30 countries.
30 countries, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fun.
So I guess just to get started,
sure.
How did you get into the business?
That's a great question because I was at a crossroads and I chose the right road. I was always been in electronics in some form. In the early 1990s, like let's say 93, 94, I was really lucky to always be on the analog to digital conversions that were taking place.
Okay.
I was into cell phones, and when cell phones were going from analog to digital, I got a job working for Pacific Bell Wireless in Southern California.
Okay.
At a place called the LA Rock in Los Angeles, and it was right outside Compton. And I was hired to, so I was a cable guy, actually. So I was working for Comcast, and I was working down in Newport Beach, and I was doing a job in this really decent house in Newport, and the guy says, "Hey, you looking for work?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I've got an opportunity for you if you're interested." I said, "Sure, what are you doing?" And he told me, I run a service center I work for Pacific Bell Wireless, and we're building a service center, and I need somebody with the technical background to help run it. And I was just like, really? Shit, I'll try,
Yeah,
well, I bought a nice suit, seriously spent the money on the suit, and I went in and had pre-formal interview, went to another interview, a third interview, 3 interviews deep, and got the job. And first thing we did was I had to get trained in Motorola and Ericsson and Nokia at the time. And I had an electronics background already, so in RF design and engineering. I wasn't an engineer, but I had a background in RF, so it wasn't that different for me. I could understand pretty quickly. But circuit board repair and stuff like that, I had to get into that a little bit more. And what was cool about it was we went through and tried to there was like level 1, level 2, level 3 trainings and stuff, and Pacific Bell Wireless had a lot of pull at the time, and this was right when analog to digital was taking place in 95, 96. And so what was happening, though, is analog, the way analog cell phones worked was you got static, or you didn't have dropouts. It wasn't digital, so it wasn't... And so when people first started using cell phones that were digital, in this case the GSM protocol, which was what Pacific Bell Wireless was using, which is different than CDMA, which Verizon and people were using, but GSM was...
So what's the CDMA?
CDMA, so GSM is 1.9 gigahertz, or I'm sorry, it's 1.3 to 1.6, I think, is the range that they operate in. It's also, the SIM card GSM originated with the SIM card. It was the first. It was in Europe. It was the military protocol in Europe, and then in the States they brought it to the States and created a cell phone technology out of it. But it was a digital communication platform that was encrypted. And the nice thing about it was that you put everything on your SIM card. So your contacts and all your contact info was on your SIM. So when your phone died, you just moved SIMs, right?
Nice. Okay.
Whereas Motorola, Nokia, and other that were non-GSM are not the manufacturers.
Right.
But the technologies like CDMA, which again is just another wireless technology. I forget the frequency they worked at. But I used to know all this stuff off the top of my head. But they didn't have SIM cards. So when your phone died, it was a big situation to transfer everything over, right? So Pacific Wireless had an edge on the market, at least from that perspective. It was also expensive, but so this is the beginning, though, and this is LA. And LA, they didn't have enough cell sites, right, back then. And so the reason that I got hired was, I got hired at the LA ROC, which stood for Los Angeles Regional Operations Center.
Okay.
And it was this new facility, and inside the facility, since it was a logistics center, we were shipping phones out and bringing phones in.
Right.
We're shipping them from San Francisco, Northern California, Nevada, and then Southern California. We'd ship phones out to the retail stores. They would sell them to people. People would get pissed because they didn't work. They would return them. They would come through our department.
Right.
So what we were doing at the time was they were outsourcing all their repairs to a company called Wireless Service Center in Santa Barbara. Okay. And WSC was what they were called. And so they
bunch
came
of
out
of kids working on.
No, these guys are military dudes.
Oh, okay.
And so they came out of they were analog though, and so they were converting to servicing digital phones.
Okay.
But the equipment you use to simulate a cell phone call, which is how you would begin testing phones. You'd bring them in and you'd simulate the calls, and so it would broadcast it out and receive and do all this stuff and put it through all its paces and handoffs and stuff like that from one site to another. You would do all this really cool stuff, but the equipment was super expensive. And so, and battery charging, all the battery repairs and there's just all that, the environmental aspects of it was expensive. So long story short, they sent me to the Wireless Service Center when I first got hired to meet their vendor, the person that was doing all the repairs. But really, it was a recon mission. And Wireless Service Center, I think, knew it. So it was so cool. It was like my first or second month on the job, and that we were going to do this recon because basically we're going to do that in-house. And so my boss kind of pulled me aside and goes, I want you to learn everything, and I want to build that in-house. And I said, okay, cool. They come down, they pick us up in a limo, drive us from L.A. to Santa Barbara.
Okay.
We get out, we do this whole thing. They take us to lunch. They want to keep our business. We're feeding them a ton of business. And then we tour their facility. But their one guy was pretty smart. I think he knew what we were doing. So he was really apprehensive to show us. And I kept probing. And, hey, can I see how you handle your batteries? Let me see your batteries, how you handle this, how you handle that. And so long story short, we kind of just took their ideas. And then I went to Florida and trained with Nokia. And Nokia, they had this massive facility that took in phones and basically repaired them.
Oh, I bet.
And they kicked them back out, right? And this was before cell phone insurance. In fact, this was right before cell phone insurance kicked in. This was actually how cell phone insurance became what it is today. You know how when your phone dies and you have cell phone insurance, they just boom, ship you a new one? So those are usually refurb phones going through this whole horseshoe process anyways. So it was kind of cool. I was in this, analog to digital conversion there, but the problem was there was not enough cell sites. So 90% of the phones that I had coming in were all good. I would say 98% of them were good. It just there wasn't enough cell sites.
Right. Yeah.
And so that commercial, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" by Verizon is because of that.
That's so funny.
So I was always battling with our BTS department, which is our network ops team, because I would be, hey, when are you going to get cell sites over at La Cienega and, we're in Beverly Hills and this area, where all the phones were selling. And man, I got stationed at the Beverly Hills store because they were having so many returns.
Wow.
And there was a firmware issue, and I had to flash firmware on all these phones. So these people were coming in, lining up outside, and their cell phone would come in, and I'd flash their phone and do this. Right. And man, they were throwing their phones at the windows. They were so pissed. I'm talking like, there's
Burt Reynolds' assistant.
People,
was out there.
No, I'm like legit people. Like I had a guy come in actually one day. This is really a trip because our GSM was actually the most secure protocol, and so a lot of people who were into stuff where they didn't want people listening in on their phone calls were using GSM. And I had a guy one time who came into that Beverly Hills store. He came in all frantic, and he had this white shirt on, these black slacks, and he had like a little mini like a suitcase or a briefcase type thing on a cart. And he came in and he goes, this needs to work. This needs to work. It's not working. If I don't answer my phone, they're going to kill me. I'm like, oh my gosh, man, whoa, jeez. Have you ever heard of stem cells? This is 96.
Right.
And I go, no, I have no idea. Did you know how what did he say? He goes, do you know how a lizard can regrow its tail? We can do that with human limbs. And I'm one of the chief scientists. And Bobby, the guy started singing like a canary at the front desk, right? And I'm just listening to this guy going, whoa, this guy's a whack job, you know?
But this is also very cool.
I had no idea. It wasn't until like 2006 that stem cells became like a big thing, right? Back then, I had no idea. I think the guy was just full of shit. Anyways, he needed his phone because whoever he was working with, scientifically, on his work, he was like, CIA. People were coming after him. He was freaked out. And then there was an old song by an artist, this gal, she sings, I just can't remember her name. You say, da, 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 da. There's some song, I don't know if you remember hearing that. But she came in one day. She was all nice, really? This artist she plays. She came in. I'll never forget. She comes in through the door. She's got a Victoria's Secrets bag. She puts it on the table. She has her phone. She slams it on the table, and she's like, I fucking hate this phone. Blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, okay. And I tried to work with her on it and stuff like that. I'm like, hey, wait, aren't you that artist? And she goes, oh, yeah. And I'm like, you're so nice on your music video and everything else. Right. You're not nice right now. But, yeah, so people that were pissed off in Beverly Hills were, people that were pretty well, that whole group. So anyways, that was pretty neat watching that analog to digital conversion. Well, as I'm a cell phone tech, or running this, service center essentially, which we basically did this cool horseshoe thing. So we graded the phones by cosmetic as they came in. And if it was a good cosmetic, it was an A. It went through this horseshoe where we would pre-test the phone, put it through a cell site simulation. Right. Does it even work? From there, if it had errors, then we would classify it differently, and then it would go to one of my level 2, level 3 guys. If it was a kind of like bad LCD screen, bad keypad, flip phones all broke all the time, that kind of stuff, then we had components. We would repair those. And so I learned some really cool sweep solder techniques. We could do real component level, like micro component level repairs.
That's pretty sweet.
It was pretty neat. I learned so much cool stuff in that. And anyways, we repaired the phone, kick it out. The last part of that horseshoe was a final test, QC, and then it went out back to the person or to the retail store for a refurb. And we had that going. We were like processing 90,000 phones a month, dude. It was brutal.
Whoa.
Yeah, and then I would take all these crazy trade-ins. We'd sell them to Cuba. We'd sell them to all these countries that used GSM, or some of these. I don't know if Cuba was one of them, but Guatemala maybe. But we were selling them. South America was getting them, I think, because they had GSM towers. Right. And so anyways, we were kind of bringing stuff in and stuff we couldn't bring to retail. We were selling. I was brokering deals. It was pretty neat. Huh. So I did that until Pacific Bell Wireless sold to
Sprint.
No, Singular was what it was called.
Then and then Sprint bought Singular.
Yeah, and then I think AT&T or something happened. So they just kept selling. Pacific Bell Wireless sold, and I always wanted to work on the cell sites though. So I got a job as a cell site tech for a little while. Okay. Yeah, and that was really cool. That was a union, like Local 11 or something like that. Okay. And so they had a pretty, LA was pretty big, and there's a lot of people and they were building cell sites like crazy at the time. Right. So that was good work. So cell sites are crazy. They had 480 volts coming in, and then they had all these radio cards, and then they had the tower, and then they had the transceivers up top, and then those things were feeding via coax, like 750 mil coax down into these feeders, and they were coming up and out. It was pretty cool.
Were they disguising them as trees back then, or
no? That when I remember the first time I ever saw one disguised as a tree, and I thought to myself, that is awesome. But Halloween, no, not yet. But people were making bank selling plots of their land, and you were selling. Basically, a lot of guys. A friend of mine got into real estate, working for their cell phone companies, selling. Basically finding the because you would cell of the cell site covered a certain area, and you would have overlapping cells, and then if the overlap was pretty, like, wasn't overlapping a lot, then as phones drove and you're on the freeway or something, you would start to break up, and then boom, the other cell site would catch you, and then I got you now,
Right. And you said it would be staticky instead of
it would be dropout.
Oh, they were dropout.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was static.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Analog was, people were used to analog problems.
Right.
You would, but whereas digital was just out,
Right.
And they were pissed, boy. Because there weren't that many cell sites, and they were selling phones like crazy.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember the radio station KLOS in Southern California doing some big skit about it. I was like, this is like, digital sucks and all this. So anyways, we did that for a little while, and then after they sold, what did I do after that? I went to a company called HyperEdge, which was doing DSL routers. So we were competing with Cisco and what was the name of it? Lucent Technologies. And this was what was happening, like when I was a cable guy, I was going from analog cable boxes to digital cable boxes.
Right.
And I was really lucky to be part of the first digital cable box deployment in Buena Park. The first time they deployed those menu-based digital, which is, back in the day, it was just a black box and you had channels.
Right.
And then we went to a menu, kind of like DirecTV type thing, where it was this big box, and we brought it in, and we had to get downloads to it and train the people how to use, the menus and everything. So
so you had to download the channels onto the box?
Yeah, you sat there in front of the person for like
so
an hour,
funny. Yeah.
But then cable modems were coming out. So we were doing, like, we'd show up, do a digital cable box and a cable modem for the sites, the network that could support it. And the network hadn't been built out yet. Buena Park was one of the first sites that had it. And I happened to be chosen I was an installer that got to be part of that team, and that was a really fun team. In fact, our boss, the leader of our team, was a really cool guy. He was in the first Persian Gulf War, so this is 94, maybe 95, so he had just come out of that war. It was 92, right. I think. And his name was Richard Barr, but he went by Dick. So he came up to me and he goes, "Hey, Michael?" I said, "Yeah, Dick Barr, nice to meet you." I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's cool, man." So he was my boss.
Really?
And he taught me so much. He was so cool. So that was the analog to digital conversion in cable TV land. And then I went to cell phones, which went from analog to digital and cell phones. And then I went from there to security, which was, at this point, by the time I got into security, after doing to compete with cable modems at the time, there was DSL, right? I don't know if you remember DSL.
Yeah.
So for rural areas where, you didn't have the cable TV, didn't have cable modems yet, you were doing DSL because they had phone lines.
Right.
And so DSL was kind of really trying hard to take up as much market as it could before cable TV came in, but cable TV had higher bandwidth.
Right.
So we had these really cool, the matrix switchers we used where it would go in these things called D-slams, and it was this big box, 19-inch, 4U or bigger 6U unit that we would stuff into a rack. All these truck lines would come in, patch down on the back, and then each card had a bank of like probably 40, 50 relays. So if you've seen a Linnell 1200 board, it's an output board.
Yeah.
Well, all those relays, they figure a big old card that looked like a big Linnell 1200 board. And they're just all these slots, and they went in, and then basically it would just multi-switch everything.
Right. Almost like the old elevator panels, too.
Totally, yeah. That's what it reminded me of. And I got to, when I worked at, it was Quantum Link. It turned into HyperEdge because they got bought out. This is when technology and the whole breakdown of the business telephone systems, which they deregulated a bunch of stuff, and then it became like a free-for-all in the business telephone world. And at that time, when I was in that whole arena of, I came out of a cable guy, and then I was a cell phone guy, and now I'm working on matrix switchers for DSL companies. So these, let's say you wanted to open up a DSL company out here where we're at, and you would use us and use our equipment, or you use Lucent, or you would use Cisco or whoever else, and then, but we would obviously want you to buy ours, and how do we compete? So anyways, it was hard to compete with Lucent and those other companies, but
Cisco was a really small company, probably easy to compete with.
Yeah, Lucent was bigger at the time.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
They were the ones to beat. And so what was interesting was during that period of time, I was working with, so Quantum Link was always trying to improve. So the guy that ran Quantum Link was a a guy that worked for Nortel at the time. He was like Nortel's top sales guy. And so he had somehow made it rich. And this was in San Pedro. And I remember our office looked over, he had a sailboat in the harbor. And, the guy was gnarly. And, but he had hired all these like top engineers to design, this thing. And he had this top engineer and then these hired guys. Some of these guys were, NASA, and some of these guys were writing the code, were put on the chips, machine language. And they were like contractors, but I got to like watch them write the code, and then I got to where I was a gopher basically. And if we got a hold of a Lucent box one time, our competitor's box, and I had to disassemble it like you would just complete surgery, put everything in on this huge area, and then the guys all dissected it, and they're like this, and that was the day they kind of realized they got their asses kicked because they were better. I'm like, whoa. Anyways,
reverse engineering.
Yeah, we did a big reverse. It was for real. And then he wrote his own software program to test everything, QC it and stuff. He was really neat. And so I got to work with some really cool guys over there. That was when Matrix the movie came out. And I remember I was sitting at this long, really cool office with this long table with all these engineer guys. And I was just this, 23, 24 maybe in the back. And these dudes are all gnarly and they're all talking, and I was like, wow, this is so neat. And then all of a sudden they all started talking about the Matrix, and at the time I was so cutting edge, Now when I watch the Matrix, I'm like, wow. So,
looks like a cartoon.
Back then, but I remember just, oh my god, the Matrix, it's so real. What if we're in the Matrix? These guys are all pretty gnarly. So I just remember sitting back going, wow, I'm gonna go home, I can't wait to see the Matrix, on VHS. I wonder if Blockbuster Video has it, but so after, so I was kind of just lucky. I had all these lucky moments in my life where I got to work with really neat people. So after the Bell Labs, or the Quantum Link, I guess it was, got bought out by HyperEdge, we went to. I took some time off. And maybe, 6 months, and then I got a job working on plotters. Okay. A friend of mine turned me on to this company called Steven Enterprises, and they're based out of Lake Forest in Southern California. And I interviewed there, and in my interview, the guy had a plotter that needed to be put together and set up, and he goes, all right, you put that plotter together and we'll determine whether or not, So basically, I put the plotter together. He had me do it for free in my interview, right? So I saved him the time of having to do it because he was one of the techs. And he goes, oh, you did a good job. And so we'll get back to you. And so did another interview, and they offered me the job. And then so basically what I did is I drove all around, used to fix blueprint machines that were still around, alcohol-based blueprint machines. Okay. And then wide format engineering copiers and printers, and then wide format scanners, and obviously the plotters like we have at our office and everything. And so that was fun because that was electromechanical. Like the scanners all had high-res digital IP cameras. That were scanning the document that was being fed through, and then it was feeding it to a computer, and then there was a print server, and there was all kinds of all the networking of it, the print server, setting up the printer drivers for the big companies. We're talking Oakley, we're talking big companies where they needed, they were doing design, and I would go to these really big offices, and they'd buy these plotters, and then I'd take them off this big truck and assemble them, and then park them, and then network them, and get them all set up, set the print servers up, work with all the CAD people, and get the drivers right, and do all this stuff, and it was intense.
I was going to say, that sounds
it was crazy.
Really intensive.
It was. But, man, it was so fun because it was, like I said, electromechanical. So you had servers. You had, obviously, working with the IT guys to get everything. You got to get IP addresses. You got to put drivers, install the drivers. You got to configure the drivers. But what was cool was the mechanics of it, right? So you had gears and pulleys and belts and feeders and rollers, and then on the old engineering copiers you had thermistors and all these heating elements and these gnarly cartridges,
because they were alcohol based.
Well, the blueprints were alcohol based, and those had chains, a big feeder that was like a motorcycle. It was like just motorcycle motor almost with this big chain. It would feed the drawing through, and then you had the alcohol. It would bleach the.
You like it? We put Vance and Hines on the printer.
Yeah. It was pretty cool, though. I like the blueprint machines, but they're not fun to work on because they smell. And engineering copiers are not fun to work on because you get the toner everywhere. And that stuff was a mess. And then the plotters suck because you get ink everywhere. And so it was definitely, I touched a lot of chemicals I shouldn't have touched. Nowadays I kind of regret not wearing gloves.
Right.
But so that was, again, going from blueprint, copiers and to high-tech digital plotters, that were going in. So I was in this transition there too. So again, this is, at this point, this is maybe 2000 and, I guess I got married in 2001. So this would have been like 2000, 2001, 99. Okay. And then, so I was there like 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. But as I was fixing a plotter one day, or one of our engineering coppers, this
just
guy.
Your whole life is like a country song.
Dude, so what's crazy is that I'm working for a company called Security Solutions, who's just like us at the time, who has a big plotter. They're printing out security drawings and, schematics and everything we use today. And their plotter was down and had to be rebuilt. And this is back when we had Windows XP.
Okay.
And so I had to go rebuild their server. So I had all the parts out, and then I had to fix their plotter. And the owner come by, and he goes, "Oh, you're pretty good with this stuff. You ever get into security?" And I go, "What do you mean? You want to be?" Or he goes, "I have an opportunity for a programmer." And I'm thinking, like, the programmers I know were programming, C++ or other languages. And I'm thinking, I'm not a programmer. And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if programming's my thing." And he goes, "Well, we have," and he kind of walked me around the facility, and he introduced me to Linnell. And he had this big board with all this Linnell hardware, and I was like, "Ooh, this is cool." And then he kind of gave me a high level what it did. And then at that point, so now actually this is probably more like 2005, 2006. And so I said to the guy, because I must have worked at Steven Enterprise for a while, but I said to him, "Well, yeah, I'm really interested in this." And he goes, "Well, here, why don't you come in for an interview?" So I did all the interviewing and stuff, and I got a job from a different reprographics company to make more money, and then I got an offer by this guy to make more money in an industry I'd known nothing about. So in this industry I've been in it 6 years maybe.
Right.
Had established myself. It was good money. I could have gone there like one of the top companies, and then I had this offer to go into security as a programmer. I had no idea anything about it. And I just remember the guy telling me, this is, a great industry, blah, blah, blah. And so I just, I went for something that I knew really well. And I just went for this total, fork in the road moment where I just went down the security alley. And that was 2006. And so I've been in the industry ever since then I got hired as a programmer, they called us back then. And then I was there about a year and a half.
Good thing you did, by the way.
Man, it's crazy. And so I went to Selectron a year after working with that guy. So I moved out of Southern. My son was born. I would never be able to afford Southern California at that time. I was living in Huntington Beach. There was no way in hell, It's like $700,000 for a 1,500 square foot house, and that was cheap. So I'm thinking to myself, man, I keep looking. If I have my young son is 6 months old,
right?
What kind of life are we just going to be living in apartments forever? What's the deal? And one of the cool things when I was with this company, they're based out of Los Alamitos, California, and we had some good accounts. One of them was Staples Center.
Oh wow,
that was pretty cool. And we had other accounts, but some high rises in downtown LA. Crazy elevator controls, a really interesting problem. One time I went to a service call in a downtown, an issue where back in the, the CRT monitors, right?
Right. So
this guy had, we went out to troubleshoot a really tough issue on a Linnell system that nobody could figure out. We had been there multiple times. We would get these ghost reads, and they couldn't figure it out, and, noise was what we kind of suspected. And the head end was in this room right next to the elevator shaft. And we walk into the room, and there's the computer that Linnell was running on, which had an old CRT monitor. And the elevator would go by, and the whole monitor would go, woo. And we're like, whoa. And then it'd come by again, woo. And he goes, oh, yeah, that does that. And we're just like, huh. And we're here to troubleshoot noise. So then we're like, if it's doing that, I wonder what it's doing to the Linnell head end that's right next to it.
Right.
And so we started kind of keeping track of what was going on and monitored it for a while. But for some reasons, when the elevator would go by, it would duplicate like a card read.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that
like
was
the
a trip.
frequency of it going.
So we
up
moved
or
the head
something.
end, and it didn't happen. So it was weird.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was just so cool. That the timing was perfect.
That's so weird.
So
I know, gotta love that, the timing.
Yeah, and so I was doing a job for a credit union, and I was doing a BioScript reader. This is again 2006, and BioScript readers were new and relatively new. And we were doing stuff. We were doing fingerprinting for the FBI for this bank for whatever reason they had to do. And I had this point of contact. It was an FBI lady. And so anyways, I was working with her. I was like, this is cool, right? But we were doing this crazy integration behind the scenes. And I just trained in Linnell, for hardware and video. So we were kind of getting into like that professional services level stuff. And so the guy that was our Linnell rep, the sales engineer guy, was Trevor Newton. And so Trevor Newton had worked with Selectron with Steve and all the team members that we know, from the early days. And Trevor was one of their programmers, right? And he was a top dude, really smart. But he went to go to work with Linnell and moved from Oregon to Southern California. He was actually still living in Oregon at the time. And this job happened to be in San Diego. So we were doing, he came down as like kind of the assist in the whole deployment and stuff. And I got to talking to him. I remember being in the elevator with him, and I remember saying, what's Oregon like? And he goes, oh, it's great. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of looking to move, and do you know anybody who's hiring up there? And he goes, I do. And he gave me Robert Flynn's card.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I remember I was doing a huge job for the water district in Santa Ana. We were doing all these wireless cameras, these Covey cameras. At the time, Covey was this really cool camera that could do like aged video. It could store video on the camera. And anyways, we had all these point-to-points everywhere, and it was a water district, so water plants, those things, and SCADA systems and stuff. So it was pretty cool. I was finishing that big project up, and I remember I was at lunch, and I called Robert Flynn to see if we can set up an interview.
And he was the vice president.
He was the
Selectron.
He was the chief operations officer, COO. Okay. And so he answered, and he says, "What do you know?" Blah blah blah. And I said, "I know this, this, and this." And he goes, "Well, you could come up for an interview," and not fly me up or nothing like that. So right. I said, all right. So I came home to my wife and I said, why don't we book a flight to fly up and do this interview up in Tigard. I couldn't even say it right, Oregon. And so she's like, I'm down for that. And so I almost took a job going back into the cell phone repair business in Tennessee at that time. I was because I was trying to find a place to, affordable that I could raise my family. And level 3, run a service center, exactly what I was doing at the LA Rock, but in Tennessee. Okay. And I was like, I interviewed with them. I got the job, actually. But I was holding out for this interview with Flynn. So I had flown up to Portland and got a rental car and stayed in Beaverton. And then we went to the interview, and it went really good. I interviewed with Robert Flynn. I interviewed with Michael Rosa. And then Rosa was funny. He had my resume on the table, and he just kind of flicked it aside and goes, so what do you know? He didn't even look at my resume. So it was classic.
Classic Michael.
And so I just, I did good enough, and I was able to get the job. And so I came home, gave my landlord a month's notice and told my family we're packing a U-Haul and moving me and my little family up. I have a tight family down there. And they were like, you're what? With my, 1-year-old son. And, but we couldn't afford down there. And so we ended up getting a really cool little condo to rent up in Beaverton. I moved up a month later and started at Selectron. And that, again, the analog transition of analog CCTV to IP, right? That was the time when everything was going to IP-based systems. And I always laugh at that, these little conversions of my life. I go, here I am again, ripping out all this coax, and we're putting in Cat 6 and spinning up NVRs, not DVRs, and blah, blah, blah. So that was cool. I got to do that with with Selectron. I met Steve. I remember Steve Runkle, and first time I met him, he was walking down the hallway Or he came out of the warehouse. I was going into the warehouse, and he goes, "Oh, you're the new guy, huh?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Where are you from?" I go, "Huntington Beach, California." And he goes, "Tito Ortiz is from there." I go, "Yeah." Huntington Beach, bad boy. Awesome. So he goes, "Yeah, I don't like Tito Ortiz." And he bails, and I'm like, "Yeah, I like Chuck Liddell or whatever."
Right.
So we kind of passed each other, and that was that. But I remember thinking, Steve, man, this guy really thinks he knows his shit. Man, he's cocky. I remember thinking to myself, he is really, really, he better be as good as he acts.
Right, yeah.
But he does, and he was.
Yeah.
So, that was what's cool. So long story short on that, dude, is Selectron was really awesome to work at.
I don't like Tito.
So fun. And then after that, we got bought out by ASG. Right. And now I'm a startup engineer. That's what they called us. When I got hired in with Selectron, Flynn called us startup engineers. That's when the term engineer started getting used.
Okay.
I don't like using that term lightly unless you have an engineering degree. And
yeah.
That's kind of, you don't want to do that. But and then of course Aronson Security Group bought Selectron, and the big plan, I remember Robert said, it was me, Brad Kenyon, and Don Ingen. So Don Ingen and Brad Kenyon still had their LEAs and their EL06s, which are their licensing for Oregon and Washington. So they still maintain their limited energy electrical licenses, but they had moved into being programmers, right? Or, startup engineers is what they call this. But they still had their licenses. So when I had come up in California when I was doing it, you didn't have to have a license. So I could come up. Right. And so and that's why it's easy to hire people down there.
Right.
But
and pay them way less.
Yeah. And you're right. And
I real quick.
Yeah.
Remember when we were getting bought by ADT, and they were buying that other company down in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we had to go down.
Acme Security.
Yep, yep, and we had to go down there. I think I was a third, maybe fourth term apprentice, and there was a guy there about your age. He was running the job.
Oh, wow.
And I made more money than he did.
Oh, geez, in Oakland, the Bay Area is so expensive.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think those guys were driving like an hour and a half into work.
Easy. Yeah.
Again, like third or fourth term apprentice. Mm-hmm. I was like,
whew. Dude, they spend 2, 3, 4 hours on the road. It's crazy.
That's nuts. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, it's not right. Those guys, they work their butts off and they do good work. Because the guys that I worked with in California were good. A lot of them had side businesses they were running because you're right, they weren't making money. But one of the things in California, though, was I was able to do things. And so when I came here, you couldn't even hold a screwdriver unless you had your license.
Yeah.
And that shocked me.
Which is good.
It is good. And but I didn't get all that yet. And one of the things that Robert Flynn, I said, "Oh, man, should I join the apprentice? I'm worried, He goes, "No, I hired you as a startup engineer." And he goes, "Pretty soon there'll be lots of you." And I'm like, "Oh, wow." So he already at that time had the vision.
He was such an innovator.
Yeah. And in fact, I remember him calling it out exactly. He goes, "I picture 6 to 8 application engineers in about 5 years." He told me that. And application engineers were our new name. So we went from startup engineer, Aronson Security bought us, and then they called us application engineers.
Right.
And then everything was getting so IT-centric on the back end, because when everything started becoming network-based, well, now you got IP addresses, you got the customer's network, you got isolated network, you got bandwidth constraints, you got, the servers and the storage of the servers and bad hard drives and fixing servers and all that crap. That came out of going IP-based systems. And then, of course, the back end started getting, the bigger the systems, the gnarlier they were getting. SQL Server, we were going from MSDE to SQL Server Express. And, you're transferring from XP to Windows 7, and then from Windows 7 to Windows 10. And then there was so much happening in that short period of time, Windows 2000 to Windows 2003 to Windows 2008, and then now 2016, 2019. So all of those, and where they got the term engineer is because when you would hire for a programmer or, a startup engineer, one of the things people were doing at the time was trying to look for people that had a certificate called the MCSE, a Microsoft Certified Service Engineer. The MCSE was a pretty hard cert to get. And so if you got a guy that was an MCSE or a gal or whatever, they were pretty valuable, right? So And then I remember, oh, wow, MCSEs, they make good money. And, oh, MCSEs, they know all this stuff. And
right.
So we were always on the hunt for them, you know. And if you got an MCSE, then they had a strong background in both Windows operating systems, server operating systems, domain controllers, networking, everything. And so you can insert them really quickly into complicated IT-centric environments. And they just learn the back end, learn the hardware, learn the application, send them to training, and then they could become
just put it all together.
Pretty efficient, pretty quick. And so that's kind of when I saw them moving to the term engineer, like Flynn calling us startup engineers, and then of course ASG doing application engineers. That was coming from the MCSE. It was like Microsoft kind of coined that term.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, anybody could be an engineer, you know.
Yeah.
So
and now they're not called engineers anymore.
Integration specialists, which is good. I remember one time a customer said, in fact, we'll get into the story. One of the big customers that we had locally, I think they've sold already, was Mentor Graphics. And I worked for a really cool guy, Robert Clore, who was one of the smartest guys I ever worked with. He was our customer, but he really was a mentor. You know, he taught Steve a lot. He taught myself a lot about security, not just making everything work, but security.
Right.
Like, what are you doing for this huge corporation? You know, you're protecting assets. You're protecting people are part of the assets. You know, you're approaching security from a different perspective. You know, it was the actual perspective of a security professional. And that's when it really clicked for me. That's when I was like, oh, this is what I like. This is like, I can put all this together, but I can design these systems. And why do you want to protect this? And how much more complicated should the authentication practice become or process become the deeper you get into the organization? Should that really tough security be on the perimeter, or should it be on the inside? Are we just going to let anybody into the facility? You know, is it street level? Is it campus type environments or big corporations? You know, all of that started to become so much cool stuff, and that he taught us so much. I think Steve learned a lot from him. I know I did. So Robert Clore was wonderful, and he said to me one time, he goes, you know, you're a startup technician. You're not a startup engineer.
Right.
And I go, I agree with you. I was going to argue with him. And he goes, but you know why they call you startup engineers? I go, why that? So they could charge me more money. So I was like, yeah, you're probably right. But then at the time, I was an application engineer. You know, you're not an application engineer. You're an application technician. But I agree with them. So now they call them enterprise integration specialists or integration specialists, which in short, you call somebody an IS person. That sounds either an information systems or integration specialist. I like that.
It makes more sense, too.
I think so, too. Because you are doing these integrations and you're tying everything together. So that is pretty cool. But so anyways, you know, once we I couldn't touch anything. He didn't want us to go through the apprenticeship, and he really kept us just doing programming and startup and commissioning of systems.
So you have actual techs, just for background for everyone. Yeah. You have actual techs out there, you know, the license holding, you know, low volt electricians. Yeah. They're wiring everything up, installing, and then these guys
certified on the products.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you guys on the back end are programming everything. It makes it so smooth.
That's why startup and engineering was cool, because you would come in at the time when you were ready. Let's say as an install tech that you've been on the job frickin' months at that point. Right. You're ready to start the system up. So we would come in, and obviously there was pre-work going on behind the scenes to prep, but you know, to start it up, program it, you know, or in some cases, you know, install the application from scratch, set up the database, everything. And basically you would just program all the hardware and the video systems and get it online, commission it, do all the commissioning paperwork, turn it over, train the customer. That's how we did it. And so we would, and then of course service, and we were doing infant protection at the time. So I kind of specialized. Brad Kenyon, who was my mentor on that, and Stephen Romeo, they really taught me a lot. And I really liked infant protection because it was a neat thing. And you always had complicated doors in hospital environments. You know, you had vertical rods and delayed egress maglocks and sounders and, you know, all these card reader integrations and stuff. And then, of course, you had the loud sounds that would go off and drive the nurses crazy.
Probably the babies and...
Yeah, so infant protection was kind of what I specialized in then for a big, long period after I did the menographic stint. And But Mentor Graphics is where we did the 30 countries, and that's where Steve Runkle, who's our GM out of our office, obviously super experienced. And at that time, he was like what we call the technical client manager / project / everything, but for Mentor Graphics. And so Steve was amazing because as a startup engineer at the time, or application engineer, he would he would do all, he would sell the system in all these different countries, design it, sell it, estimate it, right? Sell it, and then worked with Robert Clore on the design and the methodology and what we're doing all around the world. And then I would get it in basically as a package, and he would give me a manila folder, and in that would be the drawings with the panel schematics, which the panel schematics were everything.
Right.
And which was basically the can, all the boards in the can, and point to points.
Right, because like you said, all over the world,
dude,
you might not know their language or what they're talking about.
But you can read a schematic.
But you can read colors.
Yeah. You
Most
could
people
screenshot
really
and point an arrow to that input.
Sorry, colorblind people, but
I am one actually.
I've
gotten by. I'm red green, man, and I've gotten by all my life in
That's
electronics
a tough
and networking.
one in our industry.
It is so hard, dude. I actually once I could see the colors you see. So if I walk up and you say, okay, that's red, that's green, that's orange. Once I see that and you tell me what they are, I will always see it.
So have you gotten used to it at this point?
Well, usually what I'll do is I'll ask, like, let's say, all cable's different and the color shades are a little different. So when you open a sheath of cable and let's say 22.8 or something, you spread them all out, or back in the day, like Cat 6 or whatever, you spread them all out, but not all of them were the same. Some of the colors were really easy to see, especially, I was dealing with back in the DSL days, 50 pair, 100 pair, 200 pair. Like white slate.
I did not know you were colorblind.
Oh, dude, it's crazy. It's been so hard. That's why I did well in application engineering. But I've been working in electronics my whole life.
Yeah.
Resistor values.
Yeah,
I was having to do classification of resistor values.
Wow.
And having to look at the chart. But again, I could see the colors. It's just in your brain. So as long as like that purple is purple, and you see purple and you tell me that's purple, from that point forward, I'll see that hue, that color, and that will be purple to me.
Right.
If a different hue comes in, it could still be purple, but I won't know it's purple.
Right.
So I might say, hey, is this purple? And they'll be like, that one is magenta, or whatever. And I'll be like,
Gotcha.
And so, so I was really glad when things became more IT, because then I started getting although switching LEDs are always a pain in the ass,
right.
Seeing the LED colors.
Right.
But I always dealt with it. I could see the colors. It's just I need to. If you have 3 LED hues coming up, and I know what creates the color and the voltage level, right? And so I understand everything about it. It's just, okay, which one is green? That one's green. Okay, which one is red? That one's red. Okay, which one's orange? That one's orange. Okay, cool. I will always see that on those readers, So it's like you're not colorblind anymore after that, what I mean? So then you could go and be on the phone. It's orange. Okay, now it just flipped to red or whatever. So, you can see the color. Not everybody, that's just my personal colorblindness. But, colorblind was a bummer. But as you... with all the worldwide work that Steve was doing at the time, having schematics was absolutely critical, because like I was telling you, when we would do deployments, we partnered with this company called MTS out of Dublin, Ireland. And that was the coolest thing ever, because man, that guy was our boots on the ground. He would fly out of Dublin to pretty much all of Europe.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And it was cool. So I was always working in the night, So I would usually start work at like 8 p.m. and then and I'd get set up in my house, and I would have my laptop and I would have network access, and then I would log in via VPN to the servers, and then I would have pre-programmed everything for the site, and we would have a segment, Stockholm, and then let's say Stockholm has 30 readers. I'd program the panel, the 30 readers, any local I/O that needed to be done, and output stuff, and basically to the schematic, to the T, right?
Exactly.
And then that person on site, usually like if we had a mediator there, would be like Stuart at the time, was that really thick Irish accent.
Yeah.
Oh man, it was so hard to understand him. But
especially
he was
at
so
first,
cool
I'm
though.
sure.
Yeah, but he was an application engineer. So he knew exactly what I was doing. We were always on the same page. He was my eyes and ears. And I think I was telling you, like for me, the job came alive when it had video, and I lit up all the cameras.
Right.
Because now I could see everything. I remember the first time I saw Stuart for the first time. I'd worked with him all these times, and all of a sudden, Stuart, that's what you look like, And he was, hi, Michael.
Really short, red beard. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he was a cool cat, but he was out there, man. He was so good, and he would QC everything for us. He'd keep the techs, whoever the techs were at the time, up to our standards, and making sure things were labeled, making sure the panels were clean and everything.
International foreman.
Yeah, an international foreman, exactly. And he was
really
worth
cool
every
title.
penny. Man, it was so cool having him. And he was such a world traveler. He would just go anywhere. And I'd connect with him. All right, Michael, I'm on site right now. This is what we have. We're still waiting on 3 readers, so we're about this far into the project. We could probably start lighting up some cameras right now. And I'm like, okay, I've got that camera. Boom, starting this one up. Okay, I got these cameras online. Looking good. All right, can you focus this one? Focusing, right? And field of views.
Yeah, back then there were
little manuals,
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Those were getting phased out as when I got into it in 2016.
Oh, wow, yeah. Autofocus was the coolest thing ever.
God, yeah, 2017 was awesome.
Yeah, when focusing in field of view, when we didn't have Stuart, right? We had those language barriers. How do you explain a little to the left, a little to the right, to somebody who doesn't speak the same language? What I learned was, in the U.S., we're terrible. We do not speak other languages.
No.
We're not raised that. I mean, maybe you learn Spanish a little bit in high school if you're lucky, or grade school or whatever.
You don't remember it by the time you're 30 years old.
Man,
or 25.
I worked with so many countries where English was like mandatory. They like had to learn it. So they had their language, right, whatever it was, and they spoke some English. And it was like many countries were like that. And so they could get by. But the weirdest thing is that the concept of a door forced open.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. But, I was thinking about it more in detail after we talked the other day. It's because there were so many maglocks. Everything were maglocks. And I just don't think forced opens were common because they were maglocks.
Right.
People weren't prying the maglock open.
Get into that a little bit because it's actually really funny.
Yeah.
Funny kind of deal.
Oh, man. So one of the things like in India, Israel, or all over, you would have these high rises, and it would be like a tech center,
right? And
you'd have whatever the perimeter doors and stuff and so on. Big, beautiful glass doors, marble everywhere. Not an easy place to work and run cable,
right?
So the techs were good, and so and that was the other thing, seeing in all those different countries, because like what you do, right? But in a different country,
right? How
do they do it? Do they use a cart? What are their tools like? What's their style? And because everyone kind of has their own style, right? But but long story short, with the maglocks, right, was I was eventually, because everything was also locally powered, you know, like, so you didn't have, some of it was, some sites you didn't, like, wasn't home run to a power supply that was sending power out to the maglock where, it was like that. Usually there was a supply above the door, the maglock itself, we were sending a trigger. Or we're interrupting, putting a relay out in the field. We have them. They would actually fashion the relay and build the relay out in the field, like an IDEC, and route everything through. But I would just send them the dry contact trigger,
basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and basically remove power from the maglock. So it wasn't that easy to be like, oh, just power it down and give me a forced open,
right?
So if you're going to commission the door, you're going to do a card read. You're going to granted no entry is what we would do. Do a granted access, open the door, go in. And this would be over the phone. That's how I commission with them. And then they would go in, do a Rex exit from 3 different directions. Okay, good. No alarms.
Right.
All right. Give me a forced open. So, strike door, you could put a piece of whatever to block it from latching and then sneak the door open and give you a forced open or whatever.
It's way easier on an electrified handle.
Yeah. But the maglocks weren't that easy unless you powered them down.
Right.
And it wasn't that easy to power them down. So I'd be like, just power them down. They're like, we have to get through, all this stuff to power it down. I'm like, oh, man. So, but they would just be like, why do you want a forced open? I'll give you a held open. That I can do.
Right.
Right. And so I say, okay. And I'd shorten the timer so I'd get it. Okay, cool. I got the held open. So the door contact's working. Granted no entry was a good one.
Right.
That's why I would say grant access but don't enter. Because if I got a granted no entry, then I knew we're that far along. Like the door contact was good.
Right.
And then granted access, door open, perfect. Door closed. And then we would do forced open, but just that was so hard to get across. And they, why, I go, because, why do you monitor door forced open? So we want to know if somebody broke in, it sends an alarm to our security operations center. But why are you worried about that? People don't break in here. I'm like, oh, this is in the States, they do. Man, they would steal something out of there.
I was like, man.
But they were like, no, that's not happening here. You steal something here, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, right.
But Pakistan, we did work in Pakistan, and, Lahore was the... so the guy was going from Islamabad to Lahore. There's this big, long highway, straight type highway.
2-lane, right?
2-lane deal, kind of like, middle of Nevada or something, just the desert type deal, real wide open. And the guy, I was waiting forever for him to call me. And I was like, man, hey, when are you going to get there type thing? And he came back, sorry, you guys crashed a drone en route. And this is... I just was so shocked by that. I was like, you guys, right? Because I'm an American. And he's like, you guys crashed a drone, and when you crash a drone anywhere around here, it like cordons off, a huge, like people go full on mission, right, to prevent trade secrets and people to take our technology. It was a pretty extensive effort to, to get all the crash stuff. The crash site became a pretty big deal. So they would cordon everything off.
I thought for a minute there, he's like, well, I can't do anything. The drone carrying all the readers just crashed.
Yeah, nowadays it'd be like, oh, we're dropping off your readers.
Right. Where's the Rexes?
Oh, yeah.
20 minutes.
Exactly. That's how it's going to be. Jeez, man, nowadays. But but the way he said "you guys," and I'm like, that was funny. I said, "Wow, jeez, man, that's crazy," But all around the world, one of the coolest things that I remember, Shenzhen, China, and Beijing. So I don't know what the distance is between the two, but there's a train you could take between the two. At least that's what I remember. And I was we were commissioning a site. I want to say the new site was in Shenzhen.
Okay.
The old site they were moving out of was Beijing. I could be wrong because my memory, I can't remember, but it was China, and it was moving from one office location to this office location.
Hey Tyler, can we get a time distance on that? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm curious actually.
That's my Joe Rogan moment.
Terry, I would use my phone on that. I'm curious to remember because I want to say it was Beijing to Shenzhen, and then long story short though, the guy was in there. We did a move, right? So they moved from one building to the new building, but we sold the wrong readers. So we had installed everything, right? We had to go live that night. It had to be done. And nothing was working. And everyone's freaking out. And there was a language barrier. And I couldn't,
a huge language barrier.
Yeah, we were using a translator app. And so I was going back and forth with this guy on translator app. I'm like, what the heck is wrong? Nothing's reading. And I started to catch on at the time. Runkle wasn't the guy anymore. It was a guy, Michael Kennett at the time, I think, who was managing the account. And he had placed a reader order. And for whatever reason, it just ended up being the wrong part number.
Right.
And that was shipped to them. And they installed them, right? So they're like, you sent the reader, right? So it's your problem, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, it is. And I'm looking at the part number, and I'm trying to do all these, is this right? I started to catch on, right? And I finally like, oh, shoot, this is the wrong reader, and we're not going to go live tonight. And
you can't one night ship to Beijing.
Right, and the customer, it was probably 3 a.m. at this point. And the customer was a pretty tough. At this time, Robert Clore had moved on, and Michael Andrews was the new security director. He was a really, really good guy, and but he was tough, and he, it had to be done that night.
Yeah.
And so meaning when he woke up at 6, that site better be online. And I was trying really hard to get it online. It was 3 a.m. And the guy there was one of the way when they would spin up a new office, they'd actually send somebody from the States, working with the employees because they would have to get the network up for the employees and their client machines to talk back to the States, right, where our servers were. So there was somebody there, and I remember, kind of talking through that guy and the staff, and I remember thinking, well, you just moved from a site. How far away is it? Can we rip the readers out of that site and we can at least protect the perimeter? And the guy goes, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And boom, somebody got on a train, whipped all the, cut all the readers out that he could, interior readers, and then shot back down. I don't know if it was some bullet train or something, but next thing you know, before 6 a.m., we had the perimeter secure. Michael, I had called Michael Andrews at like 3 a.m, though, just to let him know, hey, FYI, it might not be good. We have this last ditch effort to rip out readers at this other place, and hopefully it comes online.
Dude, that guy had to have been moving through that building, just screw, cut,
exactly,
screw, cut.
Seriously, and I don't remember how many readers we needed to secure the perimeter, but it was like probably 5 or 6. So it wasn't like no small task, and then of course wire them up. So anyways, that was a pretty big deal, because I remember that next day we used to get awards, for customer service and stuff. It was named after Michael Bradbury.
Right.
And he was a legend at Selectron and was a mentor to Steve, our GM. And so I remember you'd get a Michael Bradbury Award, which was the elite award you could get in the company.
And it felt amazing, because knowing who he was.
You remember those
and everything.
days.
Man, oh, yeah.
You got a Bradbury Award in your Monday meeting. That was a good day.
Right.
And that one was a pretty well-earned one. I remember afterwards thinking, man, thanks.
No kidding.
But Michael Andrews called, and he was real explicit, and he wrote a really nice email saying, hey, thanks for not giving up and just thinking outside the box, and to the team out there, and leading the team, and making it so we could protect our perimeter. It was huge.
Right.
And then we were able to get the right readers out there, and then eventually finish the job. But so working over, but see, that's the thing that's so weird to me is you can do that stuff thousands of miles away, language differences, but you can't do it here sometimes. You know what I mean? You can have a job that's 30 miles away and have that, and that's a big disaster. We're sorry we can't do it, and I can't get you readers, and we don't have readers to pull from, and we have to, you know what I mean? Next thing you know, they can't even start that up. And we got lucky because of the old building. You know what I mean? Otherwise, we'd have been, out of luck. And that's why I called him at 3 a.m. I remember he was not happy about the call, and he's, oh, hello? No, he was happy. I called him, of course. That's something he needed to know. But I just said, if this plan doesn't work, it's not happening.
Yeah.
But he, all those years doing work overseas, this was my favorite time. It was such a cool time. And I really liked seeing, like, when we spun up those cameras. I remember in Bangalore or Noida, India, just seeing the people, and or Pakistan, they just they had, I don't know what it's called, but it's like, it was so hot, and they would have these full, like, body type like kind of loose clothing.
God, I am really sorry if this isn't true. Are they called burqas, Tyler?
I think that's right.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so they would wear a burqa, and then but they would have a cart. You guys have your cart with your ladder on it, and the you always put those little hooks on the end to put your ladder on there, and you have your tools and everything on there.
Right.
I just remember that camera turned on. He was in his burqa, and he had his. I was like, that's cool. That was really neat.
Right.
Yeah, so it was like something similar to that. It was like this full clothing, and they
Okay, maybe the burqa's the female version?
No, it's for the guys. I forget. Maybe.
Yeah. I think that's right.
I wonder if that is. Yeah. Well, it's hard to track, because I just, and that's again another thing where, you really are not, becoming worldly in some way, shape, or form. Like in the military, people will travel all around the world and see so much. And unless you're lucky enough to, there you go, that's it right there.
Okay.
Yeah, a kurta. Interesting. So it'd be like a kurta, but it would be full body, and they wouldn't have the pants. And I just remember thinking that was interesting, because we're so used to Dickies or Carhartts and stuff like that, and and steel toe boots and construction PPE and everything like that, and that wasn't that case.
That's so funny. Though. It's kind of cool.
It is. Funny. It was really neat. What was trippy was he came up with that outfit on, and then he had his cart, and then all behind was beautiful marble, like it was like super high end building. I was like, man, big glass. So
no
doors.
Uniforms, like they weren't like blue colored like ours.
No
logos on the chest.
No, and I think that would have been Noida, I believe, or Hyderabad. And then I think Bangalore, we were doing a site where we spun up a system there, but when the camera turned on, in the image was the ladder that he was using, and the ladder was actually made out of logs, like fashioned, and so tied sweet. With some type of leather or something, and it was an A-frame, but it was a tree, it was branches.
Right. So did it fold at all?
It was a folding A-frame.
No kidding.
Yeah. I took a screenshot. I was like, no way.
That is
because in the States you have OSHA and everything else. I'm just like, man, nobody will believe me if I tell them this.
You're not even allowed to use wood ladders anymore.
Yeah, wood ladders,
funny.
Real wood ladders, but made out of a tree, legit,
That's so sweet.
That was unbelievable.
I wonder what the weight requirement on that was.
Yeah, I wonder what kind of wood it was. I wonder because it was a legit A-frame. The guy was using it and focusing the camera off it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't believe it.
That had to have been such a cool thing to
neat.
Witness.
It was. I couldn't believe it because, again, and we're so safety, specific here.
Right.
So anyways, it worked.
A lifespan on leather.
Yeah. It was something else. And but man, he put the camera in, it looked clean, everything was labeled, and got the image right, and it worked, and everything was cool.
That's incredible.
Yeah, but I remember in Shannon, Ireland, we had a site that was always getting hit with really high winds, and it would vibrate these doors, and we would get all these false door forced open events. And Robert Clore at the time said, man, every time that happens, Securitas kind of all around the world, and they had Securitas officers there.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah, and they would, to respond, the poor officer had to drive this, security officer had to drive this long distance to get to the Shannon, Ireland site, I remember, or something like that. So when they would get a forced open and they would be concerned somebody was breaking into the facility, obviously they would, drive out there.
Right.
And anyways, to deal with the issue, it took us a while to figure it out. The techs would go, and hey, everything's right, and what's wrong? And I convinced him to put a camera there because that's the only way to do it. And so at some point, Axis made we used to call them soda pop cameras. They were just really small little cameras, but they were kind of deep, and so they looked kind of like a soda can.
Okay.
And you could they're cheap though, and you can point them at the door, and that's all it was. So just to put it right here, look at that door, and that was it. And so we tested one there, and sure enough, the door would go like this. You could see it move, and it was just you'd look at the weather reports and stuff, and see it was like getting hit with just wind, and so it would vibrate enough to cause a forced, I guess. And so that was good to have. And so then that kind of lit a light bulb in his head. He's like, man, that's going to save me a lot of money on rolling.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say that had to have paid for itself.
Yeah.
Really fast.
Over and over again. So he put them all around. In fact, at the time, Steve was the client manager, and he was thought, yeah, this works great. And he goes, do it everywhere. They're like $300 a pop. Just, it's going to save me so much money to, just the truck roll alone was $300.
So that wasn't a maglock door then. It was probably...
That was a legit regular handset.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in
handset
Ireland.
Or strike.
Ireland is kind of similar to here. The office buildings. A lot of Europe was very similar to here. India was a lot of pretty much all maglocks. Pakistan was maglocks that I remember did, and push to exits. So you would have a push to exit.
Okay.
Yeah. And that would drop the power, and that's how you get. So your Rex. And so that was the other thing. I'd be like, okay, on my prints it shows a Rex, not a push to exit, right?
Right.
And I'd be like, all right, so the Rex, that was their Rex input. Activate strike on Rex was a check mark I'd set in for that particular reader in Linnell. And of course it would unlock and, whatever. So I would say, let's test, let's do a Rex exit. A push to exit? Rex exit. Yeah, I mean, wait a second, what? Push exit. We don't have a motion Rex, and I'm like looking through the parts. Yeah, we don't have any GS160s or motion Rexes in the job. What do we have there? And I would always be so interested to see, like, send me a picture of what's going on out there because I have no idea. And then they would send it, just push to exit, boom, like a paddle, and then it would unlock the door. That's how they all exited. They still
have that in a lot of buildings in downtown Portland, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That was kind of that was just like the norm. But they had about interior office doors and everything, had maglocks, it seemed. But
actually, that kind of makes a lot of sense, because if it's busy, people walking in and out, and they're doing like primarily maglocks, unlock on Rex, that door will be constantly unlocking. So
yeah, they had to use a push button.
Yeah, that makes
Rex.
sense. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
totally
super secure.
Yeah, otherwise it'd be like click, 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 click all the time.
Yeah,
because they would do those big glass doors had these shear locks that were loud, man. I hear it be on the phone, that'd be a shakunk. And, but man, it was so cool doing all that work. And Steve just always set me up for success, man.
Yeah.
That's when I saw a project manager really manage a project. He managed all those global projects just perfectly. I mean, he set me up to succeed every time. And so now, as a project manager, I've been a project manager. I became a technical project manager when I was doing a lot of the Wi-Fi-based infant protection systems, 2016, 2017.
Right.
Right before we sold to ADT. And I knew that really well. So for me, it was comfortable. I could manage the jobs. I knew it very good.
Right.
And it was, I felt comfortable there, so I could do those jobs. And then big upgrades, big software upgrades, enterprise upgrades. I started doing those things and did a big one where we, for Software House, where we went from 800 to 9,000 enterprise, and
wow.
And did these high availability, fault tolerant servers and this other product. And so when they hired, or ASG at the time needed project managers that knew that stuff.
Right.
Not project managers that knew the electrical side so much, or even knew enough, just to do, full-on deployments and big, huge deployments. But when you did the software upgrade, you had all these risks that if you just willy-nilly it, you would be, not that they would do that. It was just they didn't understand the kind of IP planning efforts that needed to take place.
There's so much more into it than, hey, the concrete's up.
Yeah.
They're halfway done with drywall, head in there and start, cutting holes in dry. When they already have however many employees, 100 to 2,000, and you're doing these huge upgrades, man.
And they're 24/7 facilities or not, and universities, hospitals.
You guys weren't getting COVID breaks at that point where you're like, oh, nobody's there? Okay, we get to take our time.
Yeah, you're right. It would be, you would have to plan the heck out of it.
Right.
And so planning was my favorite thing to do. We would do project plans, not your project plan that you would have in the PMP, but just a plan, right? An executive summary of what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, all the tasks we're going to take, all the risks that can happen, what our requirements are, all the prerequisites, working with the IT department, make sure all your stuff's lined out. And then you execute the upgrade, and you have an outage window, and you got to pull it off, and then you have a backup plan and all this stuff. And if it fails and you tank and you need to do a backup restore, what if the backup's not good? I've had that happen before.
No kidding.
Yeah, man. Matter of fact, we were doing a university, and this was actually, luckily I found this out before the upgrade. So we were planning a huge upgrade for this university.
Right.
And so the upgrade was probably 2 or 3 weeks away. Well, one of the people that worked for the university and managed the access control system was new to Linnell, and they saw the multiple selection box and on the readers. And you know how multiple selection works in Linnell, for example, is you have all these readers, let's say 1,000 plus readers in the system.
Right. And
you do a select all, because he wanted to modify all the readers. So he did a select all, so every check marks on every, probably at that site at the time. Now they're probably over 1,000 readers. At the time, I think there were 760 readers.
That's still so many readers.
So you had 760 readers. All of them were checked. And then you have the multiple selection checkbox there. But the problem is the modify record you do is it's going to take the settings on that reader and copy them to all other readers, right? So your strike time, your hold time, your everything, right? It will take that form that you did, that you modified, and it will duplicate that multiple selection on every single thing you select. So he did a select all, did multiple selection, and that just so happened to be when he went to add the card format, which is why he was doing this. He was adding a new card format, and he thought the easiest way to do 700 readers would be to use multiple selection and add the card format. But when he did that, the reader he was on was a vehicle gate reader that had a specific strike time, pulse time for the unlock. Man. And every reader in the system inherited that setting. And all hell broke loose.
Which was probably, a split second
it was a 1 second fire. So you read your card, but the reader was here. It fired the lock real quick, but then the lock wouldn't open.
Right.
And then activate strike on Rex got undone. So all the doors that, let's say, had activate strike on Rex so you could exit properly, you were locked in. We had students locked into certain areas. They couldn't get out. They're literally going to break windows. One person, before we fixed it, literally had a printer in their hand that was going to throw through the window. So we had a lot. Man, dude, I got a call. And it was just hell broke loose, right? They're like, oh, my God, this happened because it was during the day. And all he was trying to do was add a card format.
And, of course, it wasn't a typical, 40-reader building.
700
readers.
So, of course, the natural idea would be, okay, when did this happen? I had to uncover what happened first. Finally, the guy told me what he did. I was like, oh, jeez. And then I said, what reader did you start on? This reader. Oh, that's why everything has a 1 second pulse. And so I'm like, man, this is insane, right? How am I going to fix this? Oh, well, you guys do backups every night, so we'll just take a backup. You'll lose whatever happened between last night's backup and right now. But I need your IT people right now.
A very easy price to pay.
Right. Dude, the backup file was corrupt. So we were totally screwed. And then they figured out at that point, well, why is the backup file corrupt, right? So then they went back to older backups. Couldn't restore those. So IT's freaking out. Everyone's freaking out. And then I found a reader that I did a process of elimination, or basically kind of deducted what's the most common reader here.
Right.
Right. And then, oh man, dude, I just picked one that was the most generic, proper setting, and did a multiple select and applied that. That fixed 80% of them.
Right.
And then I had to go find the vehicle gates. I had to find the Malik doors. Had to do the activate strike on Rexes.
Had to be 50, 60 hours of work.
Easy. It was just so insane. Wow. And no good backups. And so I worked with the IT department to find out why they had recently migrated their servers, and the SQL Server guy, their database administrator, I was asking them, originally I had it set to backup and overwrite, not do an amend. And so he thought it was better to do an amend, so he changed the backup type it was, and it wasn't working. So I said, man, the way I know it works is to do it like this. Right. And so we did it that way. But it was great to learn that before I did the upgrade.
Oh, yeah,
right?
100%.
Because if the upgrade tanked and I went to go try to grab a backup, then I would totally been screwed. So that was kind of a blessing, but man, it was so nuts to rebuild all that.
Man. Well, honestly, what a great story to end this on.
Cool. Yeah, it was fun to be able to talk to you and tell you all these stories. We always go around the office and I tell you little stories, but
yeah, I was like, man, we gotta get Michael on. You guys have so much experience.
He'll talk the whole time.
No, it's perfect. They hear us talk every week, so cool. No, it's awesome, man.
Thanks for having me.
Would you believe that it was an hour and 20 minutes?
No way.
Yeah.
Jeez, I can talk, man.
Hey, it's been great.
Jeez, it still looks light out there. I thought we were good to go. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. No, it was a pleasure.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Halfwatt Podcast. We always want to hear from you, and we encourage you to email us at halfwattpod@gmail.com with questions or even your own stories. Funny, crazy, or praiseworthy, we want to hear it all. You can follow us on Instagram at halfwattpod to stay up to date on our feed. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And share us with a friend, the best way to help us grow. The Halfwatt Podcast is a production of Now Hear This Studios.